Hello, and welcome to Uniquely UCF Sociology, a podcast production of the Department of Sociology here at the University of Central Florida. I'm your host, Dr. Ramon Hinojosa. Uniquely UCF Sociology is a podcast that explores the research and creative efforts of those who are doing the good work of sociology. You want to know what sociology is and what contributions sociology makes to improving our lives? Well, you've come to the right podcast. It's Uniquely UCF Sociology. Today, I'm speaking with Dr. Fernando Rivera, a tenured professor of sociology and founder and director of the Puerto Rico Research Hub at the University of Central Florida. Dr. Rivera's research focuses on disaster recovery and resilience with interest in medical sociology, race and ethnicity, and the physical and mental health outcomes of Latino populations. Dr. Rivera has served previously as the Associate Chair of Sociology. He has been a UCF Global Faculty Fellow and a Provost Faculty Fellow, helping with the structural reorganization of UCF. As the founder and director of the Puerto Rico Research Hub, his work has explored the impacts of disaster, dislocation, and resettlement of Puerto Ricans following the tragedy of Hurricane Maria. His books include Disaster Resiliency, Interdisciplinary Perspectives, and Emerging Voices in Natural Hazards Research, among others. And his peer-reviewed research is published in leading academic journals. Hello, Dr. Rivera, and welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm so excited to be talking to you today and sharing our conversation with the audience.
Well, excellent. Well, so let's talk a little bit about where you started. So where did you go to school for your PhD? And if you can recall, what was your dissertation work focused on?
Yeah, no, absolutely. You know, I was thinking about that next year is going to be 20 years. That I got my.
Well, you wear it well. You wear it well.
So you know that like time flies, right? I did my dissertation back in 2003, and it was at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln. So here we do the pause for the background of that, right? In terms of how I ended up from Puerto Rico in the middle of the United States, right? In Lincoln, Nebraska.
No, nothing wrong with Nebraska, but Puerto Rico to Nebraska.
Absolutely, no. Yeah, no. So one of the things, and this is for the listeners that might be some students and undergrad students out there in terms of the opportunities. So in my junior year of my undergrad, which I did at the University of Puerto Rico in Maya West, which by the way, this is the engineering school, so I was a social scientist in the engineering school out there, and still to this day, I collaborate with engineers. I view that sometimes social scientists just want to be around social scientists, but we know that, the promise of sociology is sort of what can we bring in the holistic type of way, right?
Absolutely.
In terms of looking at this. Yes, you can design a building. Yes, you can design a road, but who's going to use that road? Who's going to use that building, right? And at the end of the day, it's kind of like the structures that we have. And there's a lot of evidence in terms of, how even an infrastructure has been built in a way to benefit a certain group of people and maybe disadvantage a certain group of people. But in my junior year, I had great mentors, and I started doing undergrad research, and there was sort of kind of like the summer programs that you have out there. So the American Sociological Association at that time had, it was the MOST program. So it was mentoring through opportunity school transformation program, and I had it lined up, and it was going to be Penn State. So I did the application, I did everything, all those type of things. And when, I put the application, all sort of stuff, and they say, no, this is for sophomores. Oh. So I was like, oh, shoot, really? It's like, I did everything right, and it's just my standing. So another program opened up. So the University of Nebraska-Lincoln was doing an NSF research undergrad experience program. And my mentor said, well, you know what? You have everything put together. Why don't you go apply here? And I did, and that summer sort of transformed my life. That was back in 1995. So that was at the height of Nebraska football power. So Nebraska was in the news for kind of like the football and all those type of things. But that opened a lot of doors, right? In terms of, getting to know the faculty. Obviously I was coming from a different background in terms of, having to, do all this application process, do sort of the higher level type of work in a second language as well. So there was a lot of things, that I had to navigate. But I got to know the faculty at that time. They were the leading faculty in sociology of family, those were kind of like my early interests out there. So I got to work with great faculty out there. So that was sort of the connection out there with Nebraska. And it ties up with Penn State because eventually Penn State took away kind of like half of the faculty from Nebraska. We used to call it, Nebraska East. Because Penn State, took all the people I worked on when I did my master's. They kind of like went to Penn State out there. But by 2003, so in after I did my master's, I had kind of like this illumination or kind of like looking, what I want to do with life, right? And then sometimes, kind of like the students listening, life is not figured out. I still trying to figure out what life is all about, right? It's about taking advantage of the opportunities that are given to you, right? And it's perfectly fine. And you should never be afraid of failure, right? Because failure is part of the journey. So I went back to Puerto Rico, and my grand old idea was to be a Major League Baseball umpire.
That's a laudable idea. I
So
did not know that
I've
about
always
you.
been a baseball fan, and I wanted to be kind of like close to the game. But I'm 22, not great talented whatsoever in terms of that. So that was my grand old idea, right? And I went back home, got a job at a record store, and I was just waiting to start school. They have umpire school here down in Daytona. And that was my grand old plan, but that changed because then one of my mentors said, "Hey, I heard you're back. You wanna teach at the university?" And I did that for 2 years. Met my future wife, but it's gonna be 23 years now, and sort of that changed my trajectory. So, when looking at all the programs and all sort of stuff, I said, you know what, I'm gonna go to Nebraska. I know the faculty, all those type of things. And at that time, also, I was involved in the American Sociology Association, the Minority Affairs program as well, and they have the MFP program, which is the Minority Fellowship program. And at that time, it was funded by the National Institute of Mental Health. So I started with kind of like the family, but I started doing some research on mental health. And one of the things I wanted to do, and kind of like my dissertation, and kind of like what I started my research for my dissertation, was looking at what is the role of acculturation. What happens to you when you come from another culture? You come to another setting. What happens to your mental health? So that was the idea, right? And what we found was that you acculturate is not necessarily that good for your mental health per se. And kind of like idea, I mean, and obviously complicated problems require complicated solutions, right? But the idea was that when you're in that trajectory, you give up some things and you pick up some things, right? And it's within that context that actually allows you to, perhaps benefit from those traits that you have, or sometimes they don't work as well, right? And so the idea was, I remember at that time it was like, everybody that comes here has to, just assimilate, right? And for the majority of people, by the third generation, every immigrant group sort of falls into the line, right? Assimilates completely in terms of that, in terms of language, in terms of all those sort of things. But the process is similar by some people. So that was sort of kind of like the idea that started sort of my trajectory. And one of the things I wanted, to look at different experiences by Latino sub-ethnicities, right? So the experience of Puerto Ricans are different from the experience of Mexicans to the experience of Cubans. And a lot of it has to relate with the structure where they come in, right? Yes. And lo and behold, we're 20 years into it, and we're still talking about these issues that dominate sort of the press and sort of the imagination that we have out there of if you come here, you have to do this, and all those threats and all those type of things. But we were able to kind of like push that idea that sometimes for some groups it might help, but from others it doesn't. But and the good thing, it was sort of kind of like that life experience, but also kind of like that hunch that you have, and usually sort of the tools that we have within sociology to actually test it and provide some insight into the evidence-based literature that we have out here. So that was like 20 years ago. Right now, I still remember it, and we continue to kind of like evolve in some of the research.
And I love how you make it clear that this isn't just a linear trajectory, right? You don't just start out saying, I'm going to be a sociologist and this is what I'm going to study. And maybe that is true for some people, but you, like many of other sociologists that I've talked to, really sort of have a trajectory that happens in fits and starts, right? It's about the classes that you take, it's about your mentorship, it's about your lived experiences and how those things fit together eventually to lead you to where you're at.
Yeah, and I know, and I think that's sort of the benefits of the sociological imagination and have kind of like that viewpoint that you start accumulating these tools that you can apply to specific situations out here. And I think that's important in terms of that, right? You know, and things eventually combine in terms of that. You know, I say I still, you know, I know I still do some mental health research, but I look at it in a different context, right? So what happens where, you know, you're affected by a major natural hazard where you have to be displaced, and what happened to those things? And we always have had this discussion, and we still to this day about mental health. And a lot of people don't understand, right? That yes, you know, we need to have several degrees of mental health. I think it's not a 0-100 type of trajectory, right? We struggle, I mean, all the time. That we were designed not to be happy all the time. Sadness has a place within your biological mechanism to deal with issues out here. But those are not, you know, and this is where, you know, we have the structural pressures that go against the grain of what we're designed to do in terms of that, and different societies have to figure it out. I still cringe at this idea that everything that bad happens is because of your mental health. You know, and because no, you know, there's bad people in the world. We tend to accept certain type of badness within society that is socially accepted, right? But the ones that we don't comprehend, we tend to just throw it out there to mental health and all those type of things, right? And I know that we need more sort of counseling, we need more resources, and treat mental health like, you know, you get a headache, you get a prescription out there for your headache, and there's nothing wrong with you. But I think we sort of combine kind of like these value judgments with mental health that we don't do with other diseases, right? And that's sort of kind of like medical social and social health, right? That, you know, we have diseases that are sort of more acceptable than others, right? And you know, and that at the end of that, at the end of the day, it hurts people because we have, you know, we have all the techniques. It's just a social type of phenomenon, right? And you know, we were talking before about COVID, right? In terms of, you know, all of a sudden it became a political type of things. You know, if you're in team X, you behave this way. If you're team Y, you behave this way, and making no sense whatsoever what the evidence is out there, right? And I think that sometimes is a dangerous trajectory out here. But I think sociological thought can bring that about, right? In terms of, you know, it's not about your kind of like individual mentality, right? And I think that's one of the things also, you know, looking at a society and structures, right? Whatever you think you do that make you that unique, you know, there's other people that are doing that, right? And you can find it out, right? If you like, you know, armpits, you know, there's probably an armpit group out there somewhere, right? Any type of interest out here. But we are led to believe that, you know, we're so special here that we tend to forget about the structures, right? And you know, and then when those, unfortunately, when those actions and, you know, those type of behaviors are collectively put out there, then we get into some of the issues that we're talking about, and still to this day, right? In terms of, you know, how do we understand what's happening in terms of that, and you can apply some of that knowledge to, you know, climate change, you know, to health, to politics, to everyday interactions that we have out there.
You know, and as you're discussing this, what's coming to my mind is gun violence, right? And gun violence where we often blame the individual and say, well, it's mental health, and maybe we need to have better mental health resources. But maybe it is partly mental health, but it's also structural, right? It's about things like access and laws that allow access and manufacturing processes. And so it isn't just about the individual, it's about the individual rooted in society and how those things come together. And, same as with COVID, right? It wasn't just individual behaviors, it was the collective societal response to how we dealt with this deadly virus.
Yeah, and I think sometimes, these complicated problems, we tend to want to have very simple solutions
Yes.
and very fast solutions, right? We're going to eliminate this overnight. And COVID is the result of, we have had some scares before that. And, there's other countries that have had this.
Mhm.
I happened to travel to Japan prior to the pandemic in 2019 or so. And, people wear masks because, they have had some instances out there. And, it's a culture that respects others as well, right? If I'm sick, I'm going to have the courtesy to put on a mask and not try to spread all the germs around, right?
Right. Yeah.
In terms of, and that's not necessarily an individual choice. It's kind of like a cultural, structural type of thing. So I remember, going to the pharmacy or the 7-Elevens in Japan, and masks were available all the time. So you saw that, and that's the same in Korea and in other places out here. But again, we tend to view everything kind of like this panic state in terms of what we're going to do and the inconvenience that can cause to our everyday life in terms of that. But again, I think when we tend to be so extremist, right, in whichever way, and we don't sort of use the science that we have, the tools that we have to understand social phenomena, this is where we get into trouble, right? And for me, the concerning things is that, at the end of the day, are we better off, right? And I think at the end of the day, a lot of the things that we're trying to do is to improve society, right?
Right.
To make sure that, whoever has a problem has the tools necessary to resolve that problem, right? That it shouldn't be based on your race or your gender or your sexual orientation or the area of the country that you happen to live in or the country that you live in, right? That, we should have at this point of our evolution, we should have those solutions out here. But I mean, at the end of the day, it's interesting because, it's the ebbs and flows of history and society, right? In terms of that. And, that makes the unique challenge for sociologists because none of our stuff is static ever.
True.
Like
Too
2
true.
+ 2 is 4, regardless of anything, right? But we don't have those absolutes sometimes. And I think, we need to continue to study those that, and I understand that things do actually evolve.
Mhm.
And it's perfectly fine. It's perfectly fine in that term of evolution and sort of understanding science, right? That sometimes, we're going to make a conclusion based on the evidence that we have in front of us, but that doesn't make it necessarily absolute. And that's why we need to continue to do science. You cannot base science on one article or one opinion at all. So I was saying, and we tend to do that, right? It's like, hey,
Mhm.
somebody said this, it gets spread, and then that's knowledge. And it's not necessarily the case.
And you are actively involved in creating knowledge because you've created the Puerto Rico Hub. And so you've created this unique tool at the university to be able to look at Puerto Rican diaspora, particularly after natural disaster. So maybe you could talk a little bit about that and tell our audience about the Puerto Rico Hub, how it came about, and the sort of work that you're doing right now.
Yeah, so, even when, I was looking at mental health differences among Latino ethnic subgroups, I knew that, there was something going on with Puerto Ricans out here in terms of that. And, one of the draws of coming to UCF and being in Orlando was because this was where the majority of the Puerto Rican growth was happening in the continental United States, right? So,
Hmm.
Since like 2006, a lot of people have left the island, right? And I was kind of like in those crossroads also, do I go back? Do I stay here after grad school? But then all my mentors, people that were established were leaving the island. So that makes you think, what is going on out here? And it's not necessarily that, I had this desire to necessarily leave the island, but it was sort of the condition. So Puerto Rico has been going through a lot of the things out here. And we happen to be here at UCF. We happen to be at the center of that growth of the Puerto Rican population. For a lot of years, I was pushing, hey, we need to do something to understand this population, right? It's sort of becoming, now it's apparent, right? And you know, if you live in Orlando, Central Florida, you will have some type of encounter or brush with Puerto Rican culture or Puerto Ricans and, you know, all that growing society out there. So one of the things that happened was after 2017, when Hurricane Maria happened. So that was sort of a very interesting week. So at that time, I was a provost faculty fellow, you know, so I was working closely with the provost at the time, Del Whitaker. And I invited him to a talk that we had. It was probably a day after Hurricane Maria. We didn't know what was happening precisely. You know, we didn't know that, you know, it was going to be the damage that it happened, the lack of communication, the complete loss of electricity, all those type of things. So I have a colleague from Florida International University, Jorge Duani. He heads the Cuban Research Institute, but he was a longtime professor looking at these issues out here. So he's giving the presentation out here. So perfect timing, right? So the provost got kind of like a sense of, oh, wait, you know, this has been going for a while. This is all the sort of thing. We start getting people from Hurricane Maria here,
Right.
like literally here, not symbolically or anything like that. People knocking on your door, right? Because the desperation was happening. You know, usually the onset, I remember, you know, hanging up with my dad and said like, hey, we'll talk in a couple of days, right? And then you start seeing all the CNN images and you have no communication, nothing is going on, there's no knowledge, 1 week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks, what is going on, right? In terms of that. So people started leaving the island because it became apparent like after 2 weeks, you know, after sort of the first, you know, aftermath, and people were like, hey, you know, we survived all the stuff of things. And they're saying, hey, we're not going to get food. What's going to happen? So people started leaving and they started arriving at our university.
Right. And there was no power, there was no running water, no food.
Nothing, no communication whatsoever, right?
Hmm.
You know, just imagine it's like the state of Florida, you know, got separated from the mainland and nobody knew that that was happening. So even people in Puerto Rico didn't knew, you know, they thought, you know, my town got affected. So, you know, probably the next town should be fine, but they didn't even knew the scope of the damage that was happening. So it was a very tense situation, but since we had this core of the Puerto Rican diaspora here already, you know, that became kind of like the call to action out here, including ourselves here at UCF, that at the time, you know, they were giving waivers to have in-state tuition to come here. And I remember, you know, just, you know, getting calls from anybody, right? And I was like glued to my phone because I was waiting for my call from my dad to see, you know, what was going on. He's okay, all this type of thing, listening to my friends, all those type of things. So, you know, we were able to, you know, provide those resources. You know, I think that was a, you know, and it was kind of like a wake up call, right? What do we do for this population out here? And I think after Hurricane Maria, all the doubts of what we needed to do to this ever growing sector of the population, our UCF student population as well, you know, and that laid the groundwork for the Puerto Rico Research Hub, which we created in the summer of 2018. And it's a center of activities dedicated to the study of Puerto Ricans here at UCF. And with that, we've been, you know, it's been 4 years now, and we've been very successful. And we do 4 things. Obviously, we do academic research. That's what we do. That's what I'm trained for. So I have had the opportunity to be guest editor in a couple of special editions dealing with Hurricane Maria. One of the important things that we do is provide students for opportunities to do research. So if you're a student out there, you're listening to that, you don't have to be Puerto Rican. You just have to have a slight interest in research and anything that has to deal with Puerto Rico, and you're more than welcome to do so. So we've been able to, you know, provide opportunities for students to do research, and this is a high level impact type of opportunity. And I'm happy, you know, some of the students that have worked with me, some have come back to Puerto Rico, they're enrolling in medical school, they're working back in Puerto Rico, some others have stayed out here, but it's the body of research. And I think we have been able to provide kind of like that research home. Like I was telling you before, that was my transformational experience when I was an undergrad. finding a place where you're doing something beyond the books, right? It's applying what you learn into something that we have out here. So we have had great success with that. One of the things that we do is outreach as well. So we've been able to, put different things together out here. We have our own podcast as well. So give it a listen when you get a chance out there. But also kind of like this outreach, provide the opportunity to meet with different groups out here. So, we have met with Hispanic Chamber of Commerce, with different nonprofit groups, even with congressional delegations, right? So now we're taking our knowledge to the policy level, right? In terms of, if you ever need something about Puerto Rico and what's happening, give us a call, right? And that's been very satisfying as well, that, we have been able to put, forums and policy ideas together that actually some have come to legislation in terms of all the process and all the type of things that were going on. And obviously partnerships. I don't intend to do this by myself, right? And that has been a very fulfilling type of thing. So we have collaborated, not only with educational entities and other research programs out there, like the Center for Puerto Rican Studies over at Hunter College in New York, to the Natural Hazard Center in Colorado, but also with different groups out there in the community. And we have been able to partner up. We had a great event back in March where we partnered up with Major League Baseball to celebrate our Puerto Rican heritage. And, kind of like using baseball as an excuse to bring young kids to campus so they could, sort of have that great experience and actually say like, hey, look, this is an achievable goal for us as well. So we've been very fortunate to do a lot of the things out there. Obviously, with the outreach also, make sure to give expert commentaries and all sort of stuff. So that has taken me to places I never envisioned I was going to be at. And, it was every September it comes around and to see what's happening. It's going to be 5 years now in terms of the reconstruction of Puerto Rico. But again, I think it's a logical thing for UCF, for the Orlando community, for the Central Florida community, to tie up, with what's happening in Puerto Rico. And so we're starting also to create a bridge with the institutions out there in Puerto Rico. And, some things that are coming out in the future, with some collaborations, but making sure that we give that experience not only to our Puerto Rican students, but all students out here and anybody that is interested in Puerto Rican issues, that we use sort of that knowledge that we have, kind of like those tools that we talk about at the beginning of the podcast. How can we apply those tools to the problems that Puerto Ricans are still facing, but that are not problems exclusive to Puerto Ricans, right? We're talking about, climate change. We're talking about, displacement, climate migration, economic turmoil, all those type of things. Things that, if you read the news, it's happening all over the world.
Right. And so you've got all of these complex problems that you're able to bring a sociological focus to. And it's interesting because I think many people think of sociology, if they think of it at all, as a discipline where you just publish an article, you stick it in a journal somewhere, and that's the end of the story. But what you're suggesting is that your research, the active research from the hub, is involved in passing legislation. It is engaging resources and working with communities that actually need these resources to help rebuild and revitalize.
No, absolutely. And one of the things when this was, so we started this out and we were featuring the Orlando Sentinel, all sort of thing from that day on, and that was August of 2018. I get a call from somebody that's like, look, I need help with this. And sometimes it's just a simple, I can tell you like 1,000 examples, right? So becoming kind of like that spokesperson of a person that looks like you, that understands your situation out here. And through our research, we have sort of discovered some of the things that the community needs. So for example, we have Orlando is one of the areas of economic growth, but it's young entrepreneurs, from the Hispanic community. So we were able to team up with TD Bank to put together a Hispanic business education and training program. And that's where in collaboration with the Hispanic Chamber of Commerce of Metro Orlando as well. And we developed a sort of a curriculum, very modest type of funding out here, but we were able to, because we're listening to what the community is telling us, right? And it's sort of, sometimes we have kind of like that academic research, but we also have some evaluation research. We have some type of, kind of like those ears to the ground of what's happening out here. When we listen to that is based on our research, not necessarily like, hey, I'm just going to do this because I want to do them, right? It's because it's based on the research and the experiences, because we go out there and we sort of challenge the kind of like the ivory tower model, right? It's not a come to me if you have a problem. Maybe I'll listen to you, right? And I think that's the evolution of higher education as well, right? That we need to start, viewing education as a public good that is available for everything. And that doesn't,
Yes.
that sometimes, I'm in a public university. So I know that I have a responsibility as a public entity to provide the resources, regardless if you're X or Y or whatever, right? You're interested in these issues, I'm gonna make my best attempt to try to help you out there and create those conditions out here. And in the conversations that we're having about the value of education, about the value of all those sort of things, this is, for me, this is what we need to start, continue to do, right? Not start, but continue to do, to make sure that people see the value out here. And, at the end of the day, I don't know what, kind of like discourse out there, I welcome anybody like, hey, visit your university campuses. It's probably none of the stuff that you're listening to are necessarily happening at the level that you think are happening. We're not the enemy. We're working towards making a better place for you and your family out here.
Right.
And that should be the role of what we do, right? Obviously, we have individual ambitions as academics, and we need citations, and we need all those type of things. But you evolve, right? And there's room to do those type of things and make sure that we are providing a public good.
Yeah, and as I've heard it said before, this isn't indoctrination that's happening here. This is education. Our job is not to tell you what to think. Our job is to present the science, the research, the ideas, and let you make up your own mind. And whatever direction you go, at least you've been exposed to these ideas, and now you can make an informed choice. And so that's the role of education.
No, absolutely. And like everything, I mean, I would never dare to go on an airplane and tell the pilot, hey, get out, I'm gonna drive. I really don't trust you or what you're doing. I saw something out here. And I think we need to have that level of understanding that expertise actually matters, right?
Yes.
And that we need to respect that expertise at all levels, right? Just because you watch a YouTube video doesn't make you a mechanic or makes you a pilot or makes you all sort of say, it can give you some type of knowledge. I don't disagree with that, but I would never try to fix my own fridge because I don't have the expertise. I will call somebody that actually does. And sometimes that's sort of the frustrating thing that, we have tend to forget that the expertise actually matters, right? Yes. And it's not an idea of, I'm better than you or anything like that. No, it's like, more about this specific subject than I do, right? And, social media is social media and all sort of stuff, but, writing a tweet really doesn't necessarily make you a scholar or doesn't make you, the person out here. And that's why I insisted on putting research on the title, because I want these things to be based on the science that we do, not what I think the world looks like, but what we find out from our research. And I think that's important in looking at that. And yes, I mean, I wish I had that power of indoctrination that they're talking about. I cannot even get my kids to throw out the garbage.
Well, you're not alone in that. So for our listening audience out there, those who are thinking about coming to UCF, maybe want to come and study with you and do research at the Puerto Rico Research Hub, what can they expect? And so they come, they join you. What does their future look like?
Oh yeah, no, one of the things, I mean, I understand that being a young person right now or coming to institution of higher learning is very different than when I went to, right? And those experiences are useful for myself, but not necessarily for the new generation out here. So I try to understand that. One of the things that the body of research is sort of, the skill sets that you gain, right? That, it's not a literature review. is synthesizing information into a comprehensive document,
Mhm.
right? Is using your tools to get a goal out there, right? And I think, for my students and the pleasure that I have had with the students I've worked with, it's there, sometimes it's the affirmation that, yes, you belong at this university. Without you, there's no me, right? And I think we tend, as faculty members, we tend to forget that,
Yes,
right?
that is the truth. Without the students, there is no
And
professor.
I mean, yeah, it's like, no, I mean, and we have to do a collaboration in our educational journey out here. And I think, and it's a process. I think I tell students that it's a process, and again, is, sometimes people think, oh, you have a degree, then you know everything. Like, no, I learn every day something new, right? I think that and I think my transformational moment in terms of looking at education and what I tell my students is that, you can come to the university to get a degree, or you can come here to get an education.
Hmm.
And when you get an education, the degree is going to follow, but it's being a fan of learning and, learning about every single thing that happens in your life, right? And I don't have bad experiences. I have learning experiences. Some are more pleasant than others, right? But it's how do you take that experience and that what you learn from that experience, right? I think for my students, and in terms of way of collaboration, to more, I have all of it, right? In terms of, if you want to volunteer and work on a project, let's do that. If you want to do so, that's a gateway where, if you're a UCF student and you want to do a 0 credit hour, because I know your curriculum is crazy and you cannot add anything else, we can do that. If you are within your major and you have some room, we can do some independent study as well. And those are some opportunities that when I have funding, I already know what are your capabilities, right? And that way I can fund some of your research as well and some of your opportunities out here. And I think those are transformational in terms of that. So, and it's the willingness to learn. And I'm not a spec out here. What I want to do when I bring you in as a researcher it gives you the tools for you to be successful.
Excellent.
I could hire anybody to do kind of like the work that is out there, but I want you to get the tools so you can meet your professional goals. And sometimes, I mean, we're such in a rush to define what we want to do from an early age. It's perfectly fine. You don't have to know what you're gonna do from since 10th grade or so. Uh, you know,
And
let
as you said earlier, I still don't know what I want to do when I grow
No,
up.
it's a, and it's a process of discovery, right?
Mhm.
But it's been there, it's taking advantage of those opportunities. And what I've known is like they are not gonna come if you don't seek them, right?
Yes.
And that's one of the things out here. I'm not gonna text you and say like, hey, would you like to work with me? Uh, anything like that. You have to seek out those opportunities as well and put yourself in a position to take advantage of those opportunities out there. And I know it's a process, but we're doing the best we can out here to make sure to connect the dots, right? I might not be the person you got to work with, but I can connect you to other resources out here. And sometimes, students have this very unit center mentality that if it's
Yes.
not happening, my academic unit, it's not happening. You're part of a university, you're part of a community. And you never know. I get all the times, I get, from industry, I get people like, hey, do you know anybody that could do this? And, if you took that step and introduce yourself and I know what you have out there, I can connect you, right? And, it's as simple as that, right? Uh, but kind of like this idea, you have to put yourself out there to make sure you take advantage of those opportunities.
Well, that's interesting. So the mentorship isn't just about mentorship and scholarship or mentorship in terms of teaching. It's mentorship across the board about social networking, connecting students to community resources. And so whether they work with you to do research or they work with you to publish, or they simply introduce themselves and put themselves in the loop, that mentorship is there for them to take advantage.
No, absolutely. And sometimes students forget uh, the privilege that they have or the standing that they have within our community. as UCF students or Valencia students or Seminole State students, they're seeking you out. I mean, I could run out of fingers to tell you how many times I said, hey, can you identify students to do this? Can you identify students to do that, right? So there's ways to do it. And if I'm not able to help you out, we can connect you with other resources on campus as well. Because I would say UCF have great resources for students.
Yes, absolutely.
And especially for undergrad research, especially for all of it, right? In terms of that. And just because you don't know they're happening, ask somebody, right? And I think that sometimes, the mentorship goes beyond, you're right, beyond the scholarship as well. It's like, okay, maybe you want to talk to another student if you want to get passes to the theme parks that happen every day. I don't know anything about that, but I can connect you to some of the resources out there, right? And, I think we're creating kind of like this culture, this atmosphere that people feel at ease out here. Because I do understand how difficult it is to, come from your hometown and then come to this big city, which UCF is, right? But again, seek out the opportunities, and I'm sure you're going to benefit from seeking out those opportunities.
And so let's say the students come and they work with you. Where do you students tend to go? Give us some idea of what the students go on to do in their professional careers.
So I do a lot of health research. I have a lot of pre-med students, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so what I discover is that I'm able to give them the opportunity to do some research, because the reality is hard to get into labs. The curriculum for biomed and pre-med is brutal, right? You cannot fall behind and all those type of things.
Yes.
But you can do other type of research that is related to what you're doing as well. So I have students that, through that research opportunity, bump them up in that medical school application and ended up going into medical school.
Excellent.
I have students that, have gone on to grad school, and continue their trajectory. Others, one of my students is working for the Department of Housing back in Puerto Rico. Jose Luis Rivera is listening. Shout out to him. So there's a lot of opportunities out there. Some others have working on local governments, and it depends on the experience, right? I think sometimes, that's why the first meeting with my students is, what is it that you want to do? What are your life circumstances? What can we achieve or not? And I try to guide that way. I'm not trying to tell you do this or do that. Is how can I guide you to where you want to be? And in the process of discovery, that goal might change. But again, you gain that experience, you gain that knowledge, and nobody's going to take that away from you.
So it isn't just about being an academic or training future academics. I mean, that may be one goal, but what you're suggesting is that you could go on to medical school. You could go work for a public health department. You could work for local and state and federal agencies applying these tools that they've picked up through sociology.
No, absolutely. And, sometimes we, especially, we tend to compare the more technical fields to, the more philosophy type of fields in terms of that. And students don't understand that you are picking up a lot of skill sets that are needed in the labor force right now.
Mm-hmm.
The data mining that is going on, that is based on human behavior. Yes, we need the technical aspect of it, of how to put the databases and all sort of things. But the beauty of certain products out there, I'm not going to give them like the shout out to them, but they're not necessarily the most technologically in the margin of technology. It's that social aspect of it. And this is where we come in out here. I understand the area, right? If you're here in Central Florida and you want to do marketing campaigns, you want to go into media, you want to go into sales, you want to go into medicine, or all those sorts of things. Wouldn't it be an advantage to know the demographic profile of the people that you're going to serve?
Absolutely.
What are some of the specific issues that can put you ahead? Some of the things I tell my medical students is like, that half of what you're going to do is not about medicine per se. It's about running your office. It's about, dealing with records, who you're going to have in your front staff, all those type of things, kind of like those levels out here. And that applies to everything, right? And I think that sometimes, might give you a competitive advantage in everything that you do, right? And it's not, and even, look at this also globally, right? In terms of looking at this, what are some of the things that we can learn from other global partners, and what can we provide out there? So there's a lot of room out here, that it's not only, getting a degree and that's it. How do you can expand that education out here? And, so if you get a chance, also, we're working closely with UCF Global as well. And we have partners in the Middle East as well. And, we have developed this great relationship with the Consulate of Japan. And people say, like, Japan, Puerto Rico, what are you talking about? But when you look at it, when you understand the demographics and the population, even in the state of Florida, right? Japan has a very elderly population, just as is the case with Puerto Rico as well. They're sort of an island continent as well. So they're dealing with issues of coastal erosion. More importantly, they're dealing also with energy type of things, right? Just as Puerto Rico, Japan imports most of their energy needs. So there's connections out there that we can look at as well. We've worked with our partners in Morocco and the Middle East, in terms of looking at drought. Have you heard the news lately? Who better than people that are close to, that have been dealing with this with not years, but centuries, right?
Right.
And, we need to remove those barriers, because there's some commonalities out there, and be a truly global community where we understand these issues out here. And, I've been, when I did my postdoc, I had people from Harvard, Yale, from medicine, from all these fields out here. But the sociological knowledge is equally important as those other knowledges as well. And that's where the field is moving. I mean, if you look now in terms of federal funding, in terms of different type of funding source, they're looking for a more eclectic, holistic type of view out here. It's very rare that you're gonna get, unless it's a very technical type of call for papers, you always get that call. And, all the time I get, different groups, hey, we want to do this stuff. Would you be our sociologist for the team? And all those type of things. So there's room, there's demand out there. But again, it's putting yourself in those positions that you could do so. And we have a lot of issues that sociological knowledge can provide a lot of tools to resolve.
Well, Dr. Rivera, I wish I had been your student. I wish that I had been able to come to UCF and study with you. So maybe I'll join you over there in the Puerto Rico hub. And
yeah, absolutely.
All right. Well, Dr. Rivera, I want to thank you for taking your time today and spending it with us, talking about the work that you're doing and sociology in general, and some of the fantastic things that sociologists are doing. So thank you very much.
Thank you for having me. And, there's a home for anybody here. So make sure to check us out.
And if you could forward me the links for your podcast, I would love to link that so people can listen and can get a better sense of what you're doing there in the hub and at UCF Global as well.
All right, perfect. Thank you.
All right, and I'd like to thank you, our listening audience, for taking the time from your busy day to listen in as we discuss all things that are unique to UCF sociology. This is Dr. Ramon Hinojosa saying thank you, and we hope you'll join us next week.